In this video, we're going to take a look at a few direct modeling tips when working with molded parts in Fusion 360. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to do a couple of quick tips talking about direct modeling tools for your molded parts. Now, if you have created any drafted parts, whether it's for plastic injection molding or casting or any other reason why you might be modeling a drafted part, then you've often run into issues with geometry downstream. The more complex the part, the more tricky the geometry issues are. And what I found is that no amount of pre-planning or taking the time to sort of make sure you have all of those little details sorted out is going to prevent you from running into errors. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a couple of direct modeling tools. Specifically, we're going to take a look at splitting faces, and we're also going to be taking a look at the delete tool. Now, these are not often thought of as direct modeling tools when you're talking about molded parts, but there are some cases where this works really well. If you want to follow along, you can download this data set from the description in the video. It's really just something I tossed together, and I purposely made some design decisions that are going to be problematic. So what I want to do first is I want to take a look at this part. And notice that if we look at it from the right side, that it has draft on the outside faces. If we look at it from the side, either the front or the back, we can see that there are a couple of angles here. We've got some taper here, and we've got taper on the sides, and it looks like it's been somewhat shelled out. Now, this has been done with a couple of extrudes. Now, I can tell this is done with a couple of extrudes, one, because I modeled the part, but two, because you have some of these telltale signs of these extruded faces leaving small remnants. And I'm going to talk about how we can fix that without having to go back and get really creative with the original features, because sometimes the time spent trying to go back and fix those original features is just not worth the hassle. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the delete tool. Now, delete is extremely handy in a lot of direct modeling cases, and Fusion is actually pretty powerful at patching surrounding geometry, but we have to be really careful with our selection. So for example, we want to fix this face. We want this face here and this face here to be nice and smooth, to have the same draft on it. We don't want to send this file out to manufacture and have somebody send it right back. So the first thing that I would do is I would notice that this bottom face has this little ridge here that runs along, which is going to be problematic and usually something that ends up happening if you've added draft to a part after the fact, but some of your features like an extrude already have that taper on them. So the first thing I would do is select this face and just hit delete on the keyboard. Then you can also go to your modify menu and hit delete here, but shortcut key is delete. Now you'll notice we get an error. It's saying that it can't remove that face. So the next thing that I would do is I would select another face and hit delete and just see what happens. Now all that stuff went away, so that's not the selection for me. Next, I would zoom in and I would try to select this small face here. Now remember that this bottom face is part of that inside shelf, so I'm not going to be able to do anything with that. With that selected, we'll hit delete. We can see that it carried that on all the way to the end. That might be an okay solution, and now we might be able to select and get rid of that face, but you can see we're still getting errors. So Control Z, undo, and then the next step for me is to start to use multiple face selection. So we're going to get that little face there, we'll shift select this face and hit delete. Now this is a very close to final solution. You'll notice that it patched this face up beautifully. It looks nice and clean. We no longer have any draft issues. This face here, however, does look like there is an issue, but that really is only in the division of the face. Now, if you're a stickler for this kind of thing, you want this to be one nice clean face, we can go in, select this, hit delete, and Fusion does a pretty good job of patching it. So once again, we rotate around. This is what we started with, and this is what we ended with. A nice clean face with all the same angle on it. Good geometry that we can use very easily to make toolpath data to cut a mold. Now again, it really comes down to a couple of selections. You need to play around with these options, and don't be afraid to use undo, but very quickly we can get to that. Now on the back here, if we decided that we don't necessarily want this to taper this direction, sometimes you can actually just hit delete and Fusion will get rid of that face and extend the surrounding geometry. Other times you might find that you need to use move copy and actually rotate the face around. Now, if you happen to know what the draft is, then that would work. You can see here 15 degrees will get it for me. But that doesn't always work for us, and it does leave this little division in the middle. But once again, delete, Fusion does a great job of patching that geometry for us. Now that we've taken a look at delete and a little bit of move copy, let's talk about using a split tool to create a rib on this part. Now, the thing that often happens when you want to add geometry to a part that's already drafted is you get into a situation where your features aren't going to match the geometry of the surrounding part. Now, there are a couple ways that we can do this. I'm going to take a look at creating a sketch. I'm just going to make a quick rectangle. I'm not even really worried about where this is. And then I'm going to extrude this up. Now, the problem that happens is we are going away from this face. Now, in reality, we want this to be tapered. So if we add, let's say 5 degrees, which is going to be a bit too much, but we'll just do it for the purposes of this video. We're now tapering away from where we want. We're matching the angle on this outside face, but we are obviously not matching this 10 or 15 or 20 degree taper over here. So a couple of ways that we can maybe think about this is we could start to maybe create a sketch on the top here. The problem with that is the fact that the top face is also tapered. For whatever reason, this design has a taper there. And if we are to bring this all the way down, what we're going to end up having is something that matches the current shape here. But as we begin to taper it outward, if we extrude this and we begin coming down and tapering this out at 5 degrees, we are going to extend past this edge here. And obviously in this case, it's cutting through and I'm not really too worried about it, but what's gonna end up happening is you're not gonna be able to match that edge. So a couple of ways that we can get around this is by using press pull and by using a split feature. So if we take a look at this and we maybe create another sketch, we'll go ahead and just create another sketch on the top. I'm going to use the rectangle tool again. I'm not worried about dimensions for right now. And then I'm going to go to modify and split face. So we're going to split this top face here. The splitting tool is going to be my sketch. And now if I use press pull, I can just begin pulling this up. Now, if we turn this to the side, you'll notice that it matches the taper here and it matches the taper here. So this is a very powerful tool because it allows us to go ahead and pull and match the angles on both sides of the part without having to worry about extruding with a taper. Now, the thing that this doesn't do is it doesn't allow you the option to add draft or add taper while you're creating it. But let's say that we wanted to bring this up 50 millimeters. We could always go back after the fact and add draft. The pull direction, I'm going to say, is from the base, and the faces are going to be these two outside faces. And if I want to draft them at 5 degrees, now very quickly and easily, I've matched this face here, I matched this face here, and now from the top, I have 5 degrees in either direction. So that tends to come up quite a bit when you're dealing with molded parts because as soon as you start to angle faces, and especially if they're complex shapes, you often run into these situations where you can't just create an extrude and you end up doing crazy things like creating offset faces and then building out these little pieces of solids by patching all these surfaces together. And it's just a waste of time. So it's always a good idea to first give a shot to doing things like using delete to clean up those edges rather than going back and trying to fix those features, and by using things like split face to try to build out any additional ribs or features that will help match the existing taper or angle of faces. Now these examples here, these were all done using lines and straight faces, but they could have had angles, they could have been rounded, and it would have worked just the same. We can always go back at the end and we can add things like fillets to these corners or edges and round them off and do anything that we need to do after the fact because now all the geometry is one solid and it's nice and clean together. The thing that I don't like about this workflow is that you end up with a lot of confusion and chaos in your timeline. Now, if you're building things as components or even if you're just working with everything as bodies, you really don't want to see all of this. But after you're done with those direct modeling edits, it's always a good idea to come back, select everything, right-click, and just create a group. You can always rename these groups. In this case, I might call this one Direct Edit Rib. And that way, if I ever need to expand it or go back and find something that I did in here, I can always just expand that group. And now it just doesn't look as bad in the timeline. Not ideal, but again, sometimes you just can't go back to those earlier sketches or features and fix or create this kind of geometry. Sometimes you need to take a different approach. If you have any questions on this, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.